my final fight in prison. Ironically enough, over the phone. And even more ironic, and I forgot to mention in the last part, the young man reminded me a lot of me when I was his age, when I was younger, when I was coming into the system. Hot headed, not scared of anything, chip on the shoulder, willing to fight, drop of a dime, and whether it was win or lose, I was going to have my respect. And not going to lie, he got that from me. To this day, we laugh about it from time to time. I'm proud to say he is a very productive and happy father and husband of three. And he's got a small business as well. I say big business, he says small. But I was wrong. That would not be the last fight that I would have. Just months before I was getting ready to go home, that's when it changed. All of a sudden, one morning, I remember getting up to use the restroom, and I heard people start to hack and cough. And I can tell you, when you're in a dorm type environment in prison and you're already sharing a bathroom and sleeping space and everything else with close to 100 people, when you start to hear coughing and hacking, it gets a little scary. Over the next couple of days, it began to increase. And what got it even more scarier was some of the individuals in the pod, they went from being escorted out of the pod into medical treatment or a medical cell to them running out of room in the medical cells and keeping the individuals on bed rest in the pod with us as they began to cough, hack, have basically respiratory issues, unable to really get out of bed at all. It was bad. They kept the healthy in with the sick, and they even went to the further extent of quarantining the pod. I remember calling my wife and saying, babe, I hope I make it home, but probably half the pod is sick, and guys are falling out at count time. One guy, right before he was supposed to go home, fell out, passed out, totally healthy. Guy that worked out, ate, to the best of his ability, went jogging in the mornings, went to school, just passed out and cracked his head open to the extent that he needed staples. Whatever the sickness was, it was serious. It was exhausting people. It was dehydrating people. It was draining people, and it was spreading, and it was spreading fast. Up in the moment that I'm telling the story, there's probably only about 40 of us that were not experiencing symptoms. And looking back, maybe I was a carrier and just didn't know it. You see, this was the end of 2019, right before me getting ready to go home, January 13th, 2020. And a few months after I would go home, that's when the news would send out the cry that the pandemic, the global pandemic, COVID, would be in effect. And I can tell you, back in 2019, prior to me going home, in those final months on my way to freedom, they didn't know what to call that sickness, but that was COVID. That was a respiratory illness that was taking people out. And I do not know if everybody made it out of that environment. I just know when my time got called to prepare the night before to get ready to go home, I was happy. I would sit around in my chair with a towel over my face just to make sure I didn't catch any of the sneezes, coughs, or whatever on the way out. I did not want this sickness. I did not want to bring it home to my loved ones. And I wanted to be healthy. I wanted to enjoy the moments because my wife, my mother, my cousin, and my uncle were coming to pick me up the next day. It was time for me to go home, and even though the pod was quarantined, institution on lock, and things were in a state of chaos within these prison walls, it was time for me to finally go home. I had made it. I had survived 16 years and 11 months. I had survived every ordeal that had been thrown at me, every ordeal that I had signed up for. I made it. I survived. It's my time to go home. I had a lot of thoughts that night. I remember packing my stuff up after giving away as much as I could and sitting there on my bunk after taking a shower and not sleeping a wink, not a second. Literally just looking back and forth at the walls, talking to people, trying to find ways to pass the time until the morning came. And my name got called, and I'll never experience it. Never experience prison again was my thought as I was walking away. Never have to experience being behind these walls again. I'll never have to go through the ordeal and the depression and the anxiety tied to not knowing what tomorrow will bring, because no matter what tomorrow brings, I'll no longer be behind those prison walls. But other thoughts that I had attached was, do I even know how to live as a free person? Should I have got married? All these anxieties were rushing in, and then I heard it, because it was that time, 8:30 in the morning. It was B&B. It was the moment that I had been waiting for when I heard, Willers, let's go. It's the sweetest sound I'll ever hear. I promise you that. I took my mattress up front, I dropped it by the gate, and I walked as fast as I could out of that pod. I said peace to everybody, and I kept moving. I was ready to go, and I needed to go now. The only thing that had to be completed at the end of this journey was they would give me my paperwork. I would sign off to say officially I was going home, and I would take a short commute to the bigger prison across the way so I could change into my clothes that my family had left there for me because they were already waiting. Yeah, I don't know how it feels to survive something like this. If you've been keeping up with the story this whole time since part one, this has not been a story about you know wanting someone to feel sorry for me. No, this is a story of accountability, but it's also a story of survival. It's a story of truth. It's a story of redemption. It's a story that needs to be heard because it's a story that reflects countless others. It's a story that highlights all the hurdles and obstacles that an individual must maneuver and overcome just to reacclimate and become a part of society. But what about the trauma? Where was the treatment? Had you heard me discuss true treatment when it comes to mental health and rehabilitation along the way? Because we're at the end of this part of the story. But what we're getting ready to do now is go into life after prison, where, believe it or not, it got worse. Where everything that I had endured and survived really started to add up. And now on this side of things, not only was I free finally, but I was married with a mortgage. And on top of it all, the world was ending. The pandemic was here. My mental health was nowhere. I don't know how I'm going to make this part.